Based on the fact that Apple is currently the most valuable American company, it's hard to imagine that at one point in its history, the company almost went bankrupt. At its worst moment, Apple was less than 90 days away from bankruptcy. Today, we will tell you the stories of how Steve Jobs returned to Apple and managed to save the company from bankruptcy. But let's start with a quick reminder of how it happened that Steve Jobs left Apple in the first place. In 1985, due to a conflict with the current Apple CEO John Sculley, Jobs lost so much control over Apple that he decided to leave the company that he started himself. After Jobs' departure, Apple was doing quite well for several years. The company was able to increase profits based on its domination in the desktop publishing market. However, Steve Jobs wasn't satisfied with the situation in the company. Jobs claimed that there is an excessive willingness to multiply profits and a lack of innovation. He believed that Apple CEO John Sculley introduces the company in a period of declining revenues and declining market share. In fact, the situation at Apple was actually getting worse over time. Apple's market share dramatically fell from the 16% it had in the 80s to 4% in 1996. John Sculley was replaced as CEO by Michael Spindler, who was trying to sell the company to Sun, IBM, and HP. After unsuccessful attempts to sell Apple in 1996, Spindler was replaced by Jill Amelio. During Jill Amelio's first year at Apple, the company lost $1 billion, and the share price, which was $70 in 1991, dropped to $14. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs wasn't in the best position either. After Jobs left Apple, he started another computer company called Next. When the company presented its first computer, Next Cube, at first people responded with an outburst of enthusiasm, but the excitement dropped after the product was launched onto the market. Finally, the company was forced to stop producing computers and content itself with selling operating systems for other computers. And here, interesting situations arose. At the time, Apple had a problem with the operating system. The hope for the company was the new operating system called Copland, but after getting acquainted with the project, Amelio stated that it wouldn't solve Apple's problems, and in addition, they wouldn't be able to release it within the prescribed period. Apple needed a company that would provide them with a decent operating system. Initially, Apple became interested in the company called B, but during the negotiations regarding the sale of B to Apple, it turned out that B's demands were too high. At the time, Apple was also considering several other options: Solaris, Windows NT, and Steve Jobs' company Next. Finally, both B and Next presented to Apple's directors what they can provide to the company. Next's presentation turned out to be much better, and Apple decided to choose Next. Next had better technology, a complete solution, and Steve Jobs. Amelio and Jobs started negotiations, and it was finally agreed that Apple would buy Next for $429 million. Despite that, Amelio tried to convince Jobs to return to Apple permanently. Jobs was initially not sure if he wanted to return to an active role in the company. Due to Jobs' indecision about his future at Apple, it was initially announced that he would be working as an advisor. Immediately after Jobs joined Apple in January 1997, he began to strengthen his position in the company, firstly focusing mainly on protecting the people who joined Apple from Next. On the other hand, Amelio's situation was getting worse. He had to explain to the shareholders why the results for the last quarter of 1996 showed a 30% decrease compared to the previous year, and the chairman of the board, Ed Woolard, didn't like what Amelio was doing. When Woolard asked Jobs what he thought about Amelio, Jobs replied that Amelio is unfit for his position. The media also turned against Amelio. The press and its publications turned attention to Apple's problems and expressed criticism about Amelio. In addition, then Chief Financial Officer of Apple, Fred Anderson, informed Woolard of the difficult situation of the company. He said that money is leaking out, people are leaving, and other key people are considering leaving. During the meeting of the board, Woolard described how he assesses the company's chances. If we leave Amelio as CEO, we will have a 10% chance to survive. If we remove Emilio and make Jobs CEO, we will have a 60% chance to survive. If we fire Emilio and we fail to convince Steve to become CEO and we will have to find a new CEO, we will have a 40% chance to survive. The company's board decided to authorize Wollt to make Jobs an offer to return. Initially, Jobs did not want to become CEO. He agreed to join the board and become an advisor. Why didn't Jobs want to become CEO? One of the reasons was his second company, Pixar. At this time, Steve Jobs was Pixar's CEO and the company had just become publicly listed on the Nasdaq stock exchange. Another thing is that he just felt happy as CEO of Pixar and enjoyed spending more time with his family. Jobs knew that Apple was in a mess and he wondered if he wanted to give up the pleasant lifestyle he led at the time. Finally, while considering what to do, Jobs realized that he cared about Apple and decided to come back there for a while to help the company find a new CEO. Although Jobs had yet to declare how active the role he wanted to play in the company was, the board of directors had decided to fire Emilio. Ultimately, the situation was as follows. Emilio has been fired and he is leaving the company. Then Apple Chief Financial Officer Fred Anderson has been appointed interim CEO and he announced that he will follow Jobs' directions. Under the influence of Wollt, Jobs agreed to become an active advisor and approve the statement, in which it was said that he would increase his involvement in Apple for a period of 90 days to help the company until the new CEO will be hired. Jobs delved into all aspects of the business: product design, savings, negotiating with suppliers, and evaluating an advertising agency. To stop the outflow of key employees, Jobs decided to discount their stock options. This decision was the first conflict between Jobs and the board of the company. Finally, Jobs threatened to leave the company and the board agreed to his idea regarding stock options. However, this wasn't enough for Jobs. He said that the company is in a terrible condition and he has no time to indulge the board. Jobs stated that he wanted the entire board of directors to resign, and if they didn't do this, he would leave the company. The only person who could stay was Wollt. The members of the board knew that they couldn't let Jobs leave the company, and therefore they agreed to resign. After Jobs managed to force the board of directors to resign, he completed a new board of directors from his loyal people. Signs that Jobs is seriously involved in the operation of the company caused the stock price to rise from $13 to $20 a share. Another important piece of information was presented at Macworld in August 1997. During his speech, Jobs communicated that he and other people are working to improve the situation in Apple and outlined the reasons for the decline in product sales over the past few years. Next, he announced something surprising: a partnership agreement with Microsoft. How did it happen that two competing companies suddenly decided to cooperate? After Emilio was fired, the phone call with Gates was one of the first that Jobs had. He phoned Bill and said that he needs help. Microsoft was accused of infringing Apple patents. Jobs told Gates that if we continue to litigate, Apple could win $1 billion in a patent case in a few years. He also pointed out that he realizes that Apple will not last that long in a state of conflict. Jobs suggested to solve this problem right away. He wants Microsoft to commit to developing software for Mac and investing in Apple, thanks to which Microsoft will have a share in the future success of Apple. An additional incentive for Microsoft to invest in Apple was the fact that support for its own competitor may help Bill Gates' company with its problems with its antitrust case. Finally, the contract between the two companies was prepared in just 4 weeks. During the presentation at Macworld, Jobs described the terms of the contract with Microsoft. Apple was supposed to set Internet Explorer as the default browser in Macintosh, but it was possible to change the default browser. Microsoft will invest $150 million in Apple and will get non-voting shares. In addition, Microsoft committed to releasing Microsoft Office on Macintosh for the next 5 years. At the end, a connection was made to Bill Gates. His face appeared on the screen above the stage, and Gates gave a speech from Microsoft's headquarters. The news of Microsoft's investment and Jobs' involvement in the company's operations caused a positive effect on the company's shares. At the end of the day, the share price went up by 33% to a halt at $26.31, which was double the share price the day Emilio left the company. This one-day jump increased the company's stock market value by $830 million. The next step was to remind people what makes Apple stand out. Jobs stated that they have to prove that Apple is still alive and Apple still means something special. For this purpose, Jobs contacted Lee Clow, who was involved in the creation of the famous Apple's 1984 ad. As a result, advertising agency TBWA Chiat Day, where Lee Clow was the chief creative officer in cooperation with Apple, created the Think Different campaign. Instead of a series of advertisements presenting individual products, it was decided to conduct an image campaign. Its aim was not to show what computers can do, but what creative people can do with the help of computers. The famous advertisement showed creative people who took risks, paid no attention to failures, and put their careers at risk, acting in a way different from what is generally accepted. Meanwhile, Jobs finally decided that he would officially take over the management of the company for a while. Basically, he was the leader since the removal of Emilio 10 weeks earlier, but officially he was still only the advisor. The formal interim CEO was Fred Anderson. On September 16, 1997, Steve Jobs was named interim CEO of Apple. The next thing Jobs got around to was the company's product portfolio. He decided to withdraw Apple from the licensing business. In 1994, Apple began licensing its operating system to other computer manufacturers, which turned out to be quite a dubious strategy. In addition, Jobs wanted to have control over the entire device, which meant tight integration of hardware and software. Another thing was that Apple was producing numerous versions of the same products. Jobs began removing various models and products, which reduced the number of them by 70%. During the reduction of product portfolio complexity, Jobs also decided to withdraw from the sale of printers and close the Newton project. Finally, Jobs stated that the company needs 4 great products, which will fit into the categories consumers, professionals and desktop computer, portable computer. A desktop computer for a professional user was to be the Power Macintosh G3. A portable computer for a professional user was to be the PowerBox G3. As for the desktop computer for consumers, work began on a project that would eventually be named iMac. Whereas a portable computer for consumers was to become the iBook. The ability to properly concentrate efforts saved Apple. It is worth mentioning that in the first year after Jobs' return, he fired more than 3,000 people, which allowed him to save the company's financial balance. The losses for the fiscal year that ended when Jobs became interim CEO were $1.4 billion. At the end of fiscal 1998, profit was $309 million. This was the story of how Steve Jobs saved Apple from bankruptcy. If you want to see more stories of companies and entrepreneurs, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Story Behind Company.